I thought Rodney Stark's book, The Rise of Christianity, was a very interesting book, mainly because, as a sociologist, he knows how to crunch numbers. People have talked about how Christianity spread throughout the empire, but nobody could figure out how you could get from a small number in the first century to an enormous number in the fourth century. If Christianity starts with, say, 20 people in the year 30, Jesus' disciples and a handful of women right after his death, how do you get to 3 or 4 million people 300 years later? And the assumption was always, well, it's got to be a miracle. Or you have to have massive conversion, Billy Graham type rallies where thousands of people convert at once. And Stark showed, no, you don't need that. He knows how population growth works. He's a sociologist. And so he calculated a rate of growth. That by far was the best part of his book because he's a sociologist who can crunch numbers. Where he and I disagree are on just about everything else. He has various theories about why Christianity took over that by and large depend on a trust and reliance on our historical sources as simply telling it as it is. And so if we have sources from Christians who say that we as Christians take care of the sick when they're deadly ill, but those pagans, they don't care about their family members, they just desert them. Well, Stark thinks, well, that's probably right then. So Christians tend to the sick and the pagans don't. And therefore, Christians survive better because they nurse their... And most scholars who are actually scholars of early Christianity don't approach their sources that way. He's not a scholar of early Christianity. He's a modern sociologist. We have very good reason for thinking that, in fact, pagans were concerned about the sick. They did love their families. And we also know that in times of epidemic, even if it were true that the Christians took care of their family members more often than pagans, I don't think it's true, but if it was true, then what would happen is the people taking care of the sick would get sick themselves. They would get infected, and so the death rates would be higher among the Christians. In other words, it can't explain why Christianity took off when paganism was that because of better health care. And so there's example after example like that in his book where he comes up with really interesting arguments and intriguing claims that I think don't hold up against critical scrutiny. My view actually is more the view of an ancient sociologist who taught at Yale, Ramsay MacMullen, who showed that the reason people were converting to Christianity wasn't because of superior health care or because of various other, it's because people were convinced that the Christian God was more powerful than their gods. That religion in the ancient world was all about having access to power that we as human beings need simply to survive. We can't control the rain. We can't control whether the crops grow. We can't help it if somebody gets sick. We can't do anything about it. There's so much in our world we can't control. The gods can. You worship the gods for the divine power. Christians claimed their God was more powerful than the others, and they proved it by the claims of all of these miracles they were doing. And that's what converted people.